Welcome to Creating a Disruption, the podcast that focuses on ways to disrupt the traditional classroom by using engaging teaching and learning strategies. I am Brian Hall, Associate Professor of English and Coordinator of Studio 101 on the Metro campus of Cuyahoga Community College. And with me is our co-host, Kara DePaul, Director of Everything, or more specifically, Academic Professional Development. Today's guest is Professor Casandra Coin-Sweeney, Associate Professor of English. She has been with the college since 2011 and recently received the Excellence in Teaching Award in honor of Ralph M. Bessie, which is presented annually to faculty and adjuncts who show exceptional professional competence and commitment to helping students succeed. Okay, I know that when you teach, you want your students to learn how to communicate effectively as advocates. Why is that so important?
I think a lot of our students come in and don't really feel that their voice matters, or rather maybe even know that their voice matters. So I like to take this approach to give them some tools to not only advocate for themselves, but also to be able to take a look at some of the injustices in their communities and be able to advocate on behalf of their communities.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that stand out to you? Like, what are some things that students have focused on in the past in these assignments?
I think one of the big ones that comes up repeatedly is police brutality in their neighborhoods. We go at it as a class with a theme of focusing on climate change. So I try to give them a shared topic to start, but then we have a day in particular where they branch out and choose whatever they want to talk about. If they want to talk about climate or eco injustices, great. But they've also looked at transportation issues, issues with police and education issues. So they tend to have their own interests, which is great to see that connection in the classroom, that they go from, okay, you're teaching us about this thing, this stuff that I don't know if I'm really interested in, and then to, oh, I see how there are connections here and how this helps me in other ways.
Have any of the students come back to you after the class and said that they have continued on with some of the work that they started?
Yeah.
But
I hope that is something that I hear down the road. I've started this only within the last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love if somebody came back, whether that's later this year or 10 years down the road, whatever, just to know that those skills maybe prompted them to do other things. I can say that students have left the class and indicated to me that they hadn't previously known very much about climate change, and that they were excited to finally have a space to learn about that and to learn about how they can figure out who to contact, whether it's about that topic or others. So when they come in, a lot of times they don't even know who they would direct a complaint to, right? So one of the things that we work through is researching who's in charge, who makes these policy decisions, and then being able to reach out to those specific people. So I think whether or not that's carried on outside of the class, there does seem to be an appreciation for both the content surrounding climate as well as the tools and how to find who to talk to.
And I'm sure that's so important for them to understand that their voice is important and finding a way to express themselves to make a positive change.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Why did you decide? So you said it's within the past year or so.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to do the activity, to do something?
Many layers there. It is a passion of mine. So on a selfish level,
Mm-hmm.
I am the co-chair of the Northeast Ohio Climate Reality Project. I'm also doing dissertation work that relates to advocacy and education. So there's, some personal background. But I think with all that's been going on in the world as a whole, that I recognized a need for people to have an intelligent, well-developed approach to advocating for their needs or their wants. And that I figure it can happen in many spaces. Why not English? So they learn the skills to do things like write an argumentative paper or write a formal letter or what have you. But they're also learning, hey, this is important for very real reasons, not just so I can get a grade in a class.
Right.
What class specifically are you doing this in English?
It's Comp 2. So in that class, they typically are learning some argumentative writing skills and research skills. So getting them to really consider what's valid information, and giving them some of those information literacy skills also connects with this approach.
I would imagine too that when you think about advocacy, especially in the context of climate change, right? Like there is so much information out there, and there are so many different avenues that if you are just being exposed to this concept, right? Like where do you get the information from? Where are you sourcing it from? But then also to be able to then turn around and then share that with other people, right? So the students come to your class and they may learn what advocacy is. Maybe they've never even been exposed to it, but then to be able to turn around and then either advocate for another person or to share that information with their friends and their family or other students. So can you talk about like maybe some of like the other benefits that maybe your students receive from learning about advocacy in the classroom?
Absolutely. On a really basic level, in the college itself, if they're potentially in a class that they have a grade concern, a lot of them don't understand the process for how to even go about starting that conversation. So I've had students come to me in those classes and say, well, how do I approach this? I said, first thing you do is go back to that teacher and talk to him or her. But they don't realize many times that there are procedures in place for how to address those concerns. I think maybe more importantly, equally importantly, is just for them to have a sense of ownership in their lives and to be able to recognize that their feelings are valid and that if they feel like something's wrong, that they have the power to actually take some action. And again, whether that's speaking out about a grade or going and addressing other issues with pollution or the lack of recycling pickup or again, the need for stronger community connections with the police department or the need for transportation for the poor. Those sorts of things that I mentioned before, I think all of that comes from some pretty fundamental communication skills that we teach in 1020.
So when you were initially deciding to sort of go in this direction, were you nervous at all or apprehensive about doing it? I mean, it kind of aligns with sort of your work anyways, right? So did that bring a comfort level to sort of helping students move into become advocates? Or are you still kind of concerned, like, I don't really know how this is going to play out?
I think there's always a little underlying current when I try something new that is an element of, I don't know, it's like a mix of nervous excitement, right? Where you're thinking, this could be awesome, or it could flop. And there have been students, to be quite blunt, who have come in, day one, I usually ask, like, what do you know about climate change? How does it affect you personally? And I've had students flat out say like things like, it doesn't affect me at all, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There's nothing we can do about it. Those sorts of things. And I think over time, after maybe the first 2 classes of fielding comments like that, I've changed to address it as, hey, let's learn more about this, because whether or not you realize it, it is affecting you. As far as this particular assignment, or this combination of assignments that we start off with revolving around advocacy, I feel like everybody has something, even if they're not passionate about it, something that they're concerned about. So I wasn't so much nervous about introducing this concept. There are things embedded in that, and whenever I try something new, that I get, I worry, and things aren't always perfect. So when things don't go well, you pivot and try again, and discard that or modify it or what have you.
So can you tell us like a little bit more, so you level set in the beginning, right, about like what is climate change, right? And help them to kind of gain that awareness of what it is and how it may impact them. But can you talk like a little bit about specifically the assignments?
So we have a lot of reading and discussion, just getting into the basic concepts. Like I joke around, this is completely inappropriate, but I'm going to say it anyway. We joke around, like I ask students to describe, like, hey, what is climate change? What is global warming? And I explain it like we have a blanket around the planet that traps gas in. And then there's usually I pause and look at the class and like a blanket that traps gas in. And there's chuckles, but it works, right? Because they get that there's this sort of barrier that's keeping in gases and causing all sorts of negative results. So on a fundamental level, it's laughable, but more broadly, it fits, right? So we talk about just how the basic processes of climate change go about, what CO2 and methane, for example, emissions are doing to the environment. But we also talk about just eco-justice as a whole, and how climate change and other environmental concerns tend to impact those who have been historically marginalized, and get them really thinking about who's going to be impacted the most and where this is happening. I feel like I stopped answering your question, so sorry.
No.
It's totally okay.
Okay.
And it helps like kind of like unpack to give us a better sense, right, of like
Yes.
how this actually unfolds in the classroom.
Assignment. Yep, I got it.
Yeah.
So once they have some foundation, we have that day that I mentioned where they have to kind of think about what they're passionate about or what they're concerned about. And it's usually a 2-part assignment that they are first tasked with writing a formal letter, which many of them haven't done, right? Anymore, we write almost everything via email or text, myself included. And we talk about the importance of having those formal writing skills, the ability to choose your little syntax to be able to approach writing in various discourses. And then we talk about just the basics, like, you have a header, you have a date, you have like all of this stuff, and it lays out in a very specific way. And that confers to people receiving it that you've spent the time, you've taken this extra, made the extra effort to do something more formalized. And they also do some research. Okay, if this is my concern, like I mentioned previously, who's in charge of this? Like, who would it actually make a difference to reach out to? And then they write a letter and print them out in the classroom, and they sign them. And I put a stamp on it and actually mail them. Which I don't know, for just me, it feels gratifying seeing like, hey, if this might be your first time doing something like this. But then we also look at sort of the other end of the spectrum where advocacy is still occurring, and that's on social media, where, you know, you might be on Twitter, for example, and have a finite number of words that you get to use to convey the same message. And so we talk about how to show in a smaller space that the students have done their due diligence, you know, that they can convey specific statistics or background information to make these short and sweet claims still strong. And so the assignment ends up being two-part. They have the formalized end, and then they have the social media post, and they give me a screenshot. Or if we're in class, they're like, "Sweetie, come over here," you know, and I run over and I get to see what they've put up. And there's excitement around it. I think they really get into that part of it.
So are they actually posting it then to social media? How are the responses to some of that? Because I am sure, just knowing social media and the groups of people that might be associated with one person, I'm sure there are people who won't agree with the stance that is taken. So do they share any of that sort of response, or do you talk about how to respond to that?
So thank you.
Okay.
I know what I'll be doing this semester. That's a really good point. We talk about it in a more academic sense, but not with regards to the social media posts.
Okay.
Excuse me. We have talked about why there's sort of a hesitancy for many of them to even post anything. And in that they're afraid people will not agree and be uncomfortable. So while we haven't looked at sort of, you know, a follow-up session, which thank you, I will do that. I like that. We do talk about the difference in social media between posting something that's, I'm going to say, aggressive. I'm trying to think of the word, or offensive, versus having an opinion that is factual based and posting that. So I think that there's a difference in my mind between well-backed advocacy and unbased claims or lashing out. And so we do talk about that up front.
It's always interesting to think about the audience, right? Because a lot of it's just sort of, even if they don't realize they're doing it, it's an audience analysis. But I think it's interesting the idea of like holding back of what you might want to post, because not wanting to have to deal with what a response could be, right? Just the energy that will be sucked out of you when you realize, if I post this, I know I'm going to have to worry about Uncle so-and-so responding, and I just don't want to do it.
Yes. Unless your family is like mine and they've just given up.
Okay, right.
Yeah. Oh, she's being a hippie lover.
Yeah.
They've accepted.
Yeah. That's one word. Yeah.
No, but I think I really like the assignment. I mean, I think that's great, because that is the way a lot of students are communicating and how they're getting a lot of their information, whether good or bad, right? It's through those different outlets. The importance of information literacy. Are there any other changes that you've looked at or thought about making to any of the assignments here, or any other assignments that you happen to be, that you have your students do?
One change that happened within this assignment, and then I try to keep rolling that idea around in my head, was that when they were initially writing the formalized letters, I came around to the first few people and saw that, you know, they were struggling with this new format, or there was some verbiage that could use a little love. And so I kind of backtracked, and we had short one-on-one sessions, and that's something that I know that I'll continue. So that we're looking at wording together. I'm not just saying like, oh, change that, and talking about why they might want to shift tone or use different vocabulary, those sorts of things. So that's definitely one sort of a redirect with a connection to this particular assignment. I am currently working on a certificate in teaching in higher education at Cleveland State. So this is outside of the PhD. And it's been really great because it's giving me a lot of, new information and rekindling some of the approaches that I remember learning about or experiencing. So I think that I want to start having more regular, like, debriefing sessions, because they're learning all this new stuff, right? Not just about climate and about advocacy, but I think also just their place in the world and in their communities, and um, so I think that there needs to be more of an emphasis on how they feel about that, what they think is important, or where they might like to see things change a little bit. So that's one thing I know that I plan on doing. The other thing is I've just recently been sending out like a Google, remember the Google, it's not a doc, Google form, that's a survey, because I find it's obviously really useful to have their feedback at the end of the semester before I go into the next class to figure out, like, hey, what did they really enjoy? Or what would they like to see different? I know one thing that I learned from that I was pleasantly surprised by was the students really seem to like the book I've been using. I want to tell you, like, most classes, they're like, I hardly read the book, which is such a horrible feeling. Like, great.
All this time and effort picking the perfect book.
Right, yes. Or I hated the book, right?
Yeah.
I did read it and it was
And
awful.
I just go home and weep
Right.
at that point.
So in this case, and I'm mixing it up with the honors course, but I've been using the Future We Choose. And I'm gonna go totally blank. Figuera, and just went blank on the second party's last name for the authors. But the book is written by people who were involved with the Paris Climate Accord, and they start out showing like the worst case scenario and then like a more utopian result. And then the book goes on to explain some of the basics, but also how forming that group of multiple parties around the world has fostered some change. And the students, it's not long, it's easy to access, but college level, and they really seem to actually like it. So that's pretty cool.
Is it? But yeah, so I'm looking at Brian's bookcase in the studio, and I keep seeing that it says a toolkit for writers. And so I'm wondering, like what, like, is there a toolkit for advocacy, or does this book help to unpack some of those tools? Like how do you teach that to students, or what kind of references do you give them to go back later on? Because advocacy doesn't happen just in a one situation.
Yeah.
Like, you may be constantly advocating for different things over your lifetime. And so what do you do to help them kind of remember that after class?
Good point. I think there are numerous toolkits. The one that I have used is the Ohio Environmental Council. They have one in place, and I think that that's something we bring up, like ideas for how to keep it going, that I would use with them. That gives a lot of different options, whether it's texting or keeping abreast of who their politicians are. That's one of the things that we do is take a look at like, hey, who is your councilman? Who's the governor? You know, and a lot of people don't know. So at least this is a starting point to get them thinking about that. But I think you bring up a good point that I have not been providing them that toolkit. I have used it, but not in a regular way. So,
Next semester.
oh yeah.
Next year.
Oh no, this coming next week. Next week.
Well, one of the great things about teaching, right, is you have a chance to do it again, right? And always working towards perfecting it and sort of keeping things that you feel really strongly about, and then maybe just pushing off some of the things that aren't working so well. And sometimes the things you push off are the ones that you kind of learn the most from, either about yourself as a teacher or students. Is there, maybe not specifically to any of these assignments, but just assignments in general, just assignments that didn't work? Maybe you thought this would be great, because I know I can probably do a list of things. I'm like, oh, they're gonna love this, and then you sit there in class and go, oh my god, why did I do this? It's not working at all. And so, what did you learn about it, and how did you change, or if you changed, or if the change was, I just never did that again?
The change actually is somewhat connected to this assignment. So let's backtrack. A few years ago, we were using So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson.
Right.
It was the Common Read book. And I thought, man, this is going to be brilliant. I am going to have students go in, much like what I'm doing with the advocacy assignment. I'm going to have them go on social media and have them find things that, you know, instances of public shaming, you know, and we're going to talk about this. And
Unpack them.
yeah. And so I'm not kidding when I say like half that class was totally anti-social media, which
Makes that
pointed
hard.
out to me that I had kind of lumped this group of students into like, well, everybody uses social media, especially young people, right? When the reality was like some of them, I had to ask them to sign up, like, hey, could you create a Twitter account? And they were not happy about it. Many of them were like, well, can I delete it when we're done? And I realized that there was some dissonance there. I was trying to create something that I thought would be fun and engaging. And in fact, it was making people feel that they were doing unnecessary work and they were uncomfortable with having to do something like that. The pivot for me is I didn't have any issues with the last few classes in doing the aforementioned assignment. But I know now that if somebody came to me and said, hey, I'm uncomfortable doing this, I don't want to set up a social media account, I would simply give them like, okay, well, here's what you would be doing if you were in that venue. And we would also talk about why. And there are some very legitimate reasons to not be on social media. So I think it's good to give them a workaround and also have that conversation about, you know, sort of where it falls short for them. But so far, I haven't had to go that route.
I'll just say one thing. You said this a couple of times. I love how you use the word pivot when you come into something, because it is, right? Sometimes like, oh, I'm just going to forget about it. But the pivot for me, it's always that, okay, it could be a slight change, it could be a big change, but you're just moving. And to me, it just has a much more positive way of looking at it as opposed to, I'm not going to do that anymore. So I just noticed that. And I'm like, that's, I have to start speaking that way. Because I think it's great. Like it's sort of the pivot to that. So now I sort of lost my train of thought because I was like, oh, I have to find a way to pivot. Kara? Yeah.
So actually in relationship, like to pivoting and learning these experiences, right? Like they happen in real time, right? Like you're probably lecturing in the classroom, right? In person, you know, and you find out, you know, students don't have access to social media or whatever the case may be. And when you do pivot, like how do you as an instructor, like how do you process some of this? And like what do you do? Do you share with yourself, with your colleagues? Like how do you process these changes these pivots that you want to make in your classroom and move forward?
In the immediate, if there's, not that you're asking for education advice, but I think the one thing that we can do as teachers that makes a great impact is I told those students that day who were uncomfortable with the assignment, I was like, I'm trying something new here. You know, and I think there's a lot to be said for admitting like, hey, I'm doing this because I think it's, you know, gonna be effective and that you're gonna have fun with it. But hey, I'm human. I'm obviously wrong. And letting students know that as instructors, we try stuff and it's not always perfect and that we're not always perfect. Is that transparency, I think, is really important just in general, right? Like I'm trying to you know, instill X with this assignment. I'm hoping that you will learn blah from doing this. Just letting them know ahead of time that there's a method behind the madness, and also sharing that failure is normal and what you do next is sort of the most important part, right? Do you just give up? Like, did I walk into the classroom and go, oh my gosh, they're not on social media. That's it. Let's just call it a day.
Semester's done.
Right, yeah. Or did I get upset or mad or no, you know, I think modeling that behavior for students, especially younger students more than our older students is, and maybe even our older students, you know, who are coming back and likely very tentative about being in a new situation that they haven't maybe been out of school for 20 years. So showing that not everything is always fluid, not everything is always perfect, but you can come back and shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Successfully pivot.
I think it's also like a really tangible example of advocacy in a way. Like the students are advocating that for whatever reason that something in that assignment felt off to them, right? And they were able to speak up to you. You were able to demonstrate like that real world moment of like receiving their feedback and saying, okay, like we can learn, we can shift, we can change from that, and feeding that like a feedback loop back to them and to show them that change is possible and that some people can accept that and we'll work with them if they do advocate for themselves. So in a way, it's like a real world example, and then you keep learning along with them, you know. So
that's one of the best parts of this job, right? I always tell people, and I'm not making this up, I have the best job in the world. And I think part of that is because we're always meeting new people all the time and encountering new and different things. We keep learning, right? It's that lifelong learning. Teaching is a way of doing that and getting paid for it. You know, it's fantastic. So you get to hopefully help people grow, but you're growing yourself right alongside them for sure.
Yeah. To go back to the point that you made about just letting students know, like it's not working, moving on. I can go back to so many moments when I first started teaching 20 some years ago, where I just couldn't do that. Like the idea of going in and if it didn't work, the freeze. And you're like, see you Wednesday, and just sort of walking out, right? Because it's so hard to want to sort of expose yourself, because it's the idea of being credible, right? I'm more of this isn't working, right? That's so, like you said, it's so important to be transparent, because students relax a little bit and they also start to recognize, okay, this isn't working. I think there's going to be some grace if things don't work out in something that I'm doing. So there's a greater comfort level there. But I would just say, gosh, it took me a long time to get to that point, to really just sort of let go. And I don't know if there's any advice to give teachers who might have that, like that moment of sometimes it's okay
Mhm.
just to let go a little bit and just let students know, hey, this is something new. I don't know what it's, or it's, and I know we talked about this with other guests, what you do in one class works
Mhm.
so well, and you're like, this is the greatest assignment ever. And then the class later that day or the next day, this is the worst assignment ever. And how to balance that out. But yeah, I think just getting to that point of being honest with students about what you're trying to do. And I think it helps, even what you said, this is what the goal is.
Mhm.
This is why we're doing it.
Right.
And clearly the outcome isn't
Right.
what we ended
Here's
up
the
wanting.
intent.
Right. Good intentions.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Excuse me. I often think about the teacher I was when I started. So I started teaching in 2008. Um, you know, what I think a lot of students don't realize is we have a lot of knowledge as professors, but many MA and even PhD programs don't necessarily provide any training in teaching.
Right.
So you come in the classroom like, I know all this stuff and I want to share it. And all you really have at that point, or all I really remember having at that point was, like a 2 credit course in pedagogy, which was, more than a lot of people had. And examples from the classes I've been in, other teachers. And so starting out teaching, for sure, I look back at that person and I'm like, I shake my head, right? I was so often so rigid and like, this is how things have to be. And if you're late, you're basically being dismissive of your classmates and your
Right.
time. And these are all things that I can now reflect on and think, well, yeah, you're also coming from a very different time. Right? A lot has changed in the last 15 years, but also that was them, not me, right? Like that's not me as a teacher. And I think as we teach more, we start to recognize like our goals, our hopes for our students, and for how we come off. And somebody coming in a little late now, to me, I will flat out say, I'm so glad you made it. And I'm
Right.
genuinely glad they made it. It's but that person 15 years ago, or it has been 15 years. Oh my gosh. I was just going based on how I had been treated. Right. So yeah, I think going back to that idea of lifelong learning, over the last 15 years in the classroom, I've learned a lot.
Yeah. No, I know me now and me then, we'd have words.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because it was almost to the part of being like overly rigid,
Mhm.
like to the point it didn't make any sense.
Yes.
And some of it for me, it's like just being younger at that point, right? And wanting to show that I had some authority,
Yeah.
right? And,
I think
and a lot of it is just being self-conscious and
Mhm.
scared,
Oh yeah.
you know?
You should have seen my initial lesson plans. They were very not scripted, but like down to the minute, like 7 minutes, you're gonna spend 7 minutes on this, and that is not, it's just not comfortable, right? There should be sort of a flow to how things go, and you have to be able to change directions if the class wants something different. Instead of being like, nope, I can't give you that right now because we're going this way for 7 minutes.
Right. I did not learn the art of the pivot at that point.
No,
right?
exactly. No, me neither.
No, I know Kara, I told you this story, but my first lessons were scripted when I first started teaching, and I would practice them
Aw.
beforehand. And I would wait for laughter when I was practicing. because
See, you have time, right?
because I thought it was just hilarious. So they were 3-day weeks, 50-minute classes.
Mhm.
Hold for laughter, 50 minutes. It was down. First day of class, guess what? No one laughs, right? And so 50 minutes was maybe 15. And like I got through everything. Because it's also that the
Yeah.
nerves, because you just start talking a lot faster and deciding to write something on the board. And then you go, this is taking too long to write. I'm not writing on the board. And then it's like 15 minutes, you're like, all right, well, I guess we're done.
I know, the one thing I remember vividly was having that lesson plan in my hands and
Yeah.
and I was shaking so badly that I then made sure for many years, in fact, I don't know when I stopped doing this, but I would make sure that there was a podium in any room I taught in so that I could put this down and not be shaking. And it's funny because I do wish I could remember when that stopped.
Right.
I still had an issue with public speaking up until 5 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
which is crazy to think because I mean, teaching is public speaking all the time. But
Yeah, I'm similar because teaching, I don't think of it as public speaking. It is, right?
mhm,
But I'm like, I can go in there and just talk. Everyone has a blast now. See, now it's,
they laugh.
I don't have to hold for laughter because it's nonstop. But getting me in another scenario with the same number of people,
Mhm.
just can't.
Anti-anxiety medication.
Yeah, works wonders.
Brilliant, let me tell
But I think like being comfortable with like those like moments of silence too. Like sometimes I think about like a classroom where if you are scripted, you have 7 minutes to get from point A to point B. Like we're humans and sometimes like my brain doesn't even process what you said for maybe like, I don't know, 1, 2, I haven't had coffee, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And I only have 3 minutes left, right? And that's where our students are at too. Like, so we know where we're going and we know where we want them to go, but like our students are coming from a very different wavelength at that point. And so being comfortable with like those moments of silence or like seeing it as an opportunity for them to collect their thoughts, their ideas, what they want to say, and then plan out how they want to respond, I think is a little bit of an art, right? And I see it happen like in public speaking in meetings. It's like if someone's not constantly talking, we're not constantly driving that vehicle forward,
Mhm.
that means we're not working. And it's actually not that at all. It's that we're processing, we're creating, we're envisioning, our mental processes are working, And so being comfortable with that time and that silence and giving the students the time that they need.
I think that's an art and again something that's learned over
Mhm.
time. One of the things that I experienced in the PhD program that I now use, and it's so simple, is if we're talking about a new topic, or maybe I come in and we met on Tuesday and here we are Thursday and we're going to be chatting more about what we started on Tuesday, right? This happens. As I'll say, okay, take like 5 minutes and just collect your thoughts, write it down, right? So you have this brainstorming session just for the students themselves. And then, maybe even talk to somebody next to you for a few minutes so you can refresh your memory, or if somebody wasn't here. And then we can talk, right? It's like a warm up. You don't
Right.
just like, not that I run like ever, but I don't just go into yoga and start doing sun salutations, right? There's a warm up period where you let everything loosen up. We need that for our brains too, to kind of acclimate to the situation. I don't know about meetings. I have like a whole different way of, if I'm in a meeting, it's a very different process for me.
Sure.
My focus for a meeting is to have the least amount of complaining and the most amount of forward action. That's like a different venue.
That's the next episode.
That's
of the podcast.
That's right.
Different podcast
Right,
altogether, I
right,
believe.
okay.
But it's interesting because the whole idea, and that's something that I'm still trying to learn, that quiet moments are not moments where nothing is happening. Things are happening with, students are reflecting, thinking, trying to determine how to respond or when class is over, whatever it may be, right? That's what's sort of just hard to get used to in teaching, because you're just sort of like, all right, someone has to say something. Or if I'm on the script going, ask the question, no answers, all right, then move on, which I know I was really horrible doing that, not providing that time, just sort of like ask the question, then moving on. Like, I don't know anything. I'm just gonna keep going.
Last semester, I was teaching business communications and I was giving an exam and it was so quiet in the room that you could hear a pin drop or a mouse run out the corner or whatever the case may be. But it was so quiet in the room, and to the point that I even felt like a little bit distracted because like if I had so much as picked up my pen, like you could hear me as do that. I didn't want to disrupt them. And finally somebody either like sneezed or coughed or whatever, and then there was like kind of some laughter, like it like broke the ice a little bit, right? And I said, do you guys want me to put like some music on in the background? And they were like, oh my God, yes, please. And so that's all that it took was put like a little bit of like soft piano music on in the background, but it made me realize that like even you want to provide this quiet space for them to concentrate and focus and to take this exam, but sometimes when you still have people around you, you still have all that mental energy like swirling, and even though it's not being expressed right through noise and communication and conversation, you can still feel that, right? And they can still feel it. And so it kind of made me realize that that's like one of the things that I want to start doing better, like and thinking about like giving them exams, like the space that's created for them, and things of that nature. So it kind of leads me to the next question of like, what are you excited about, or what do you want to try next? Like, what's either things that you want to do, things that you want to collaborate on, things you want to try in the classroom?
I have to piggyback off your last point, which I guess kind of connects to your question.
Sure.
And that is, so this past semester, I didn't do a great job at this, but I put together what I'd hoped would be this beautiful soundtrack for the class, right? In essence, I asked students to provide a few songs that they would want to hear like when they're writing and working on things. And we did it once. I had every intention of like every Wednesday we were gonna have like, the class playlist. I learned, you guys are gonna laugh at me, I had to learn how to use Spotify. So I made our class but I really had hoped to develop this, and so that'll be a focal point for this coming semester, is to hold myself accountable to not just playing that one round, but collecting more and remembering to do it on our writing days, because like students got into it. They were so cute, like this is my song, really getting into it.
Yeah, I've done that with my teach honors.
Okay.
So anytime I do it, I have them do, beginning of class, they do a self-portrait. They draw sort of how they see themselves. And on the back, they put a song they want to hear. And then I would do a Spotify list. And I've been doing it for a number of years. So I have close to 500 songs on the Spotify list. So the interesting thing is, yes, as soon as they hear their song, it's my song.
Right.
That's
They're
my
like,
song.
they're
Stop.
moving
It's my
around.
song.
Yeah.
But the one thing I found interesting is I shared it this past semester with my class, and they were really curious because it's going back semesters now to see what the other songs were, and then go, I wonder why they like that song, or why did they pick this one? It became just sort of an interesting sort of historical exploration through music of my honors class, because some songs were popular at the time, some were oldies. Some were, and I still remember one kid always wanted to do a cartoon theme songs. So there's My Little Pony
We
theme
have
song.
one
and
Disney.
Yeah. No, it's just sort of an interesting sort of artifact of class. So yeah, I highly encourage people to do a class song list.
Okay.
Keep going back
And
to
so
it.
you can save it on Spotify. So both of you are using Spotify
Yeah, so
like playlist.
It's open, so
Okay.
the students can go and listen if they wanted to explore it on their own. So.
So there's another thread I can explore.
Yeah.
I am excited. This semester, for the first time, I will be co-teaching Humanities 2020 with Miguel. I'm co-teaching with the absolutely fabulous Kim Hill. And so if anybody's unaware of how the class is structured, well, I guess it kind of varies by who's teaching it, but the idea is that there's a civic connection. And so right now we have been talking about some of the seminal works in environmentalism that connect to the humanities, like Rachel Carson. They just read some Thoreau, which was an interesting conversation after the initial reads. They were like, "Whoa, this is a lot of work,"
Yeah.
but they were getting all the good stuff out of it. And so they'll be doing some readings, listening to music, looking at art, touching on various elements of the humanities that connect with the environment. And then in the second half of the class, I have been working with the Community Life Collaborative, which is a local organization that, like it sounds, is a collaborative of organizations around Northeast Ohio who are focused on environmentalism, not just advocacy, but also providing products and services related to making Northeast Ohio greener, legit greener. And the students will be breaking up into groups and working in the community to help develop specific projects. So whether they're focusing on a new park that's going to be built and providing research for the organization about demographics and what sorts of things the community might like to see in that park, those sorts of things, or whether it is building a portion of a website for an organization. Regardless of what their project is in these small groups, they'll all be required to dig in and do a lot of research in a real life working situation. So I'm excited to see those collaborations, both with the organization, but also within groups and how they make connections between what they're doing and the background that they're getting right now in connecting the humanities and the environment. So that's going to be all new for me. I have never taught the course. I am, I have like a gazillion ideas for what we could do. And I have had the chance to co-teach previously with Kim, and we are a dynamic team. We balance each other out a lot, so it's fun.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of fun. So when you go into like a new class, do you still go back to maybe over preparing and over scripting the stuff, or is it, do you feel, because I'll truth be told, when I teach a new class, sometimes I tend to fall into this is exactly how it's going to be because it provides a little bit of comfort. Does that?
So Kim and I are very different in our approaches, and so she has. I'm just going to give you sort of an anecdote. This last summer, I decided I was just gonna go with the flow, right? Because I just admire how she teaches, and I'm like, I know this stuff. I don't need to have like all this scaffolding in place for myself. I was wrong. At the end of the semester, I was like, that was so uncomfortable for me. I need like here. It's much less detailed at this point. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But so what I typically need, especially with a new class, is like a series of points. Like, here's what I want to do, right? So I send myself an email. I usually have a weekly email that reminds me when I walk into the classroom, like, here are the things I want to focus on. So for example, and I'm really unveiling my anal retentiveness here. It'll say something like review worksheets, number one, and then show short film, discuss, and then disseminate PowerPoint, and then, right? So it gives me this structure of what order of events things should go in. If I get to a certain point where I realize it's not going to all fit, then I can pivot and decide
Yes.
what needs to go or what can be brought in, the next class period. So I definitely typically have something like that in place, but I think it's about the same level, whether it's a new class or a class I've taught a gazillion times.
Okay.
I also, as a sidebar, would say a few times, this contradicts what I just said in some respects, but there are times where I'm driving to work and I have an idea and I'm like, man, okay, you guys are both nodding.
Yeah, no, that's a great moment.
Right? I'm like, I think I'm gonna try this. Right? And you go in, try it, and I want to say like 9 out of 10 times that kind of spur of the moment thing that wasn't pre-planned or written out ends up being like amazing. It ends up being awesome. And I think some of that comes back to constantly reinventing ourselves, in the classroom, not using the same materials, not doing the same activities, playing, in how we're doing things and keeping it fresh. Students know, right? That's part of the reason I got involved with the Common Read and still think it's fantastic because we're always looking at a new text, a new way of seeing things, a new way of presenting things. And I think that enthusiasm is infectious. You're in the classroom, they know like this is new to you and that you took the time to try something new and that's cool. So up on my little tangent.
No, I think that's so true because I go back to sort of the example before, something working great in one class and the next class it doesn't. Sometimes it comes back on me because I know that my energy level for the one might have been pretty high. And then it's like, oh, this is the third time today I'm doing this. We'll just get through it. And then I'm like, I don't know why no one was engaged in it because it was me. But yeah, those moments where you're just driving into work and you go, I'm going to do this. You just go in there and like, this is what it's going to be. Let's go. And everyone just gets on board with it.
Yeah.
But then when you try to sort of capture it again, for me, it always comes off disingenuous at that point when I'm trying to fake the energy.
Yeah, you can't fake that.
No,
I don't think.
Well, sometimes there's this element of like it's this raw inspiration, right? Like you have this idea and like you're going for it and you're gonna trust that it's all gonna work out and you do. Maybe it's a little bit overly optimistic, like, yeah, this is gonna be awesome, it's not gonna flop, it's gonna be totally awesome. But I think there's this momentum then that carries you, right? When you have that kind of feeling that like, yeah, like I got this. This is a great idea. Like let's just roll, like let's roll it out. Let's see if it works. And you're not second guessing yourself or over analyzing or over planning. And so sometimes it's hard to recreate that momentum and that energy when you've done it 2, 3, 4, 5 times now, right? Because that raw inspiration is really, to me, like what is
because you just stop thinking.
Right.
Because you just go, right? And just by going, any sort of bump in the road, you just go right over it. Because it doesn't matter. But then when you start doing it again, you start getting hypercritical of it.
Yeah.
But
and I think I will admit, when I go into situations like that, where I've had this great, quote unquote, great idea in the car, I do have some part of me that's like, please let this work, right? Like I hope this is okay. And I get so excited when it does, and I go home and I'll call my mom on the way home and be like, I tried this new thing today and it was so great, like the students totally got into it. It's exciting. It kind of paves the path for the rest of the day, right?
Right.
Where you feel like, I'm actually good at this.
Yeah.
All right. Today.
And I'm sure your mom appreciated the extra phone call.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was a great conversation. Congratulations again on winning the Bessie Award. And I hope you have a wonderful semester.
You too.
All right. Thank you.